Hello and welcome, and thank you so much to all of you who have joined already and are on time. It is massively appreciated. My name is Paul Sims. I'm speaking to you from London, and I'm super excited about today's session. It's been a long time coming. It's called AI, Are Your Clinical Trials Ready? And of course, you could go to an AI and clinical trial session every single day of the week and probably twice on the weekend if you wanted to. So, how are we differentiating ourselves here? Well, we're not really talking about the technology and tools and techniques that are on offer today. We are talking about what we need to do in order to be ready for all of those things, in order to take advantage of all of those things, in order to make sure that those exciting futures that we hear about, that we dream about, can become reality. So you can see the subtitle underneath the title here, Move from Protocol Chaos to Automation, Insight, and Agents that Actually Work. And of course, AI, like any technology of the day, there is a fair amount of hype. But there is also a total understanding that if we don't jump on board, we are going to suffer, we're going to be left behind. And perhaps this is one area where first mover advantage could indeed be a real advantage, and we absolutely need to get our hands dirty and get stuck in. Today, of course, we know that most clinical development runs on documents. It doesn't necessarily run on the data that we wish it to. And we also know that the most advanced AI in the world won't necessarily save a broken process underneath. So once again, like we always hear, it's about ensuring we know what we want, and then we're ready for the technology so that we have that data backbone, that insurance that we can actually do what we want afterwards. And so I'm super excited today because it's not just me that's, of course, talking. I'm going to introduce my panel. Before I introduce them, I'd like you to introduce yourself. That's right. Open up the chat window and say a quick hello. I can see a lot of you are on the line, and I want today's discussion to be that a discussion, not just a one-way street. So please write, give us your name, tell us where you're calling in from, and maybe, if you're willing, just a sentence on why you're here. What is it that you really want to know about? What is it that you're hoping to hear from our panelists? And then anything that you can say will make sure that your questions get answered later in the session. I also want to get a little poll question going right from the off. That's right. I want you to ensure that you are interacting immediately. So if you look at your screen, you'll see a two-part question arrive on there in just a second under the title of beliefs. And I want to know where it is that you genuinely believe you are today. So, number one, when you think about AI in clinical development, which statement comes closest to your personal view? So, take one of those, read them all before you answer. And the second one, which emotion best describes the current mood around AI inside your organization? So, you've got a range of options there. So, I'll hold that open for 3 or 4 minutes. You've got time to read it and answer. No rush needed. Okay. Meanwhile, this is me, and this is our panel, far more attractive than I am. So I am super excited that we have Camille. You've seen her a couple of times before on webinars that I've run, and the reason for that is because she's absolutely fantastic. I love having Camille on board. She is definitely a crowd favorite, as well as someone who can see, I think, across the breadth of the oncology spectrum. So R&D, as well as a previous stint in charge of medical affairs, and I think brings that groundedness as well as the scientific capabilities. She is, of course, bringing more than 15 years of oncology leadership across multiple different companies, and I'm super grateful to you, Camille, for being here. Mickey is somebody who I've been introduced to recently. He's super excited because he's at Duke, where he's an executive, Clinical Research Institute, but he's also an entrepreneur. He's also working at iCubed, and so very much a leader who spans both the spectrums. He was the former CMO at Lightship, and he brings expertise from a strong tenure as a professor at Duke. He's guided cross-functional teams, and he's led major programs delivering strategic and data-driven growth. So, Mickey, I am super excited to have met you, very excited by the conversations we've already had, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. Raj is someone who was speaking on a webinar with me at the beginning of the year, and so good we asked her back. She did. She is the Senior Director of R&D Business Strategy and Operations Excellence. I think we've run out of space on there at Jazz. And I'm super, super excited because, of course, part of her role is indeed bringing that maturity that I spoke about in the introduction to life and making sure that the whole organization is on board so that we can take advantage of this technology. And last but certainly not least is Matt. Matt is the VP of Digital Health Strategy at Evanova, is a man much in demand and is very much a thought leader in our space. I'm super, super happy, of course, that Matt's with 2 decades at AstraZeneca leading digital patient health and innovation. He's done so much to accelerate trials, enhance patient experience, and drive more sustainable research. So we are most fortunate to have him here. And I want to say a special shout out to Matt's colleagues at Evanova, who have really helped to make sure that today's webinar happens, comes to life, and indeed is the quality that you're about to witness. All of our speakers are speaking from their personal perspective, not necessarily representing their companies. And yes, I am recording today's session. You don't need to ask me for a recording. It will be sent to you afterwards. I'm going to end the poll now. Thank you to nearly all of you who answered, and we'll have a look at the results actually, I think, before we move any further. So here we go. What do you think about AI? Basically, is the first one, and 36%, more than a third of you, say it will fundamentally reinvent how we design and run studies within 5 years. So you are bullish, you are in the right room, and you are very positive. AI will streamline processes, but not transform the underlying model is over half. And then I guess they're not in this room, much smaller answers for everything else. Second question, which emotion best describes the current mood? Determined excitement gets a fifth of your vote, but nearly a half on cautious optimism. I don't think there's any surprise here. I expected this one to be a bit of a normal distribution, but interestingly, only 4% of people saying defensive fear, despite that as being something I hear about a lot in my conversations with executives. That one, only 4%, indifference 0%. Interesting. Okay, very, very interesting. Now, you might also remember that you answered a question or two when you signed up for this webinar, whenever that was. Why don't we have a quick look at the answers to those questions as well? So the question that I asked was, which of the below statements best describes your organizational maturity in clinical development? So let's, organization's AI maturity. So let's have a look at what won. This one, 40%, mostly pilots, early structure templates help, yet design remains document-led. No surprise there, kind of a middling option. 26% say document-driven, so still untouched, shall we say, by AI. 17% structured and repeatable with pockets of AI use. And then finally, we have AI-supported study design, so the smallest group being the most advanced there. But I would say a significant minority, not a tiny minority, 15% of you. So that was question one. And then question two was this. If your executive team mandated AI-assisted protocol design next quarter, what's the single biggest constraint that would stop you from deploying it safely at scale? Well, here you can see we have a joint winner. That has never happened before in all the webinars I've done. So what were they? Fragmented ownership on the left and capability and culture on the right. So these are the biggest constraints that people see that are stopping us progress safely at scale in AI. That's very interesting. What were the other items? Budget and support limitations, missing traceability and validation, 10%, and then finally on the very small, fear of job loss blocks adoption. So that fear, just a minority once again. Very interesting. Okay, so thank you so much for bearing with me while I went through all of that. I can see that most of you have introduced yourself in the chat window now. Please make sure you have if you haven't already done that. Oh, I've got some friends in the room. Thomas, James Barlow, good to see you. Philip, fantastic. Great to see you all. Let's have our panel turn the cameras on so that we can start today's conversation. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you very much for bearing with me there. Aren't you all beautiful? I want to start today's conversation by focusing on the challenge, where we are today, why we think that AI still has a prospect of failure. I find that we've got a short-term memory. I remember working back in the early 2000s when the internet itself went through a huge trough of disillusionment, and it was embarrassing for a stage to say that you worked online at all. So we somehow don't believe that the same is true of AI because of the positivity and all of the hype and talk that we hear at the moment. But why do we think, or why could we think that AI might fail without having a stronger backbone and stronger preparation? That's my sort of hypothetical question to you all to begin with. So, who wants to start off the conversation with a reflection on where we might go wrong? I can see
Oh,
everyone wants to jump in. Camille,
yeah,
just trying to find the unmute button. Yeah.
Very happy to get this one started.
Please.
I have to say, I think where we could fail is if we go too fast and we believe that we are ready when we are not ready. And I think with AI, it's actually going to be a challenge to know when we are ready. And I think that's the purpose of this discussion today. But on the principle, we really need to go step by step, and we need to look at all the different dimensions of AI that we can use for clinical trials. And there are multiple modalities that we can use and multiple aspects that we can use. So it's really taking it step by step. Otherwise, clearly, if we go too fast, will not be successful. The biggest hurdle to me that we need to work with all together is going to be regulatory authorities and how this is going to be integrated in their framework. So that would be the one biggest hurdle at this stage that I would see.
And Camille, just sticking with you for a second longer, do you think that the 2 points you made there are related? So are you saying that our need for cautious progression and not trying to run before we can walk is partly determined by how well the regulatory and external environment is ready? Or really are the two things quite separate? One of them is internal, one of them is external.
No, I think both are related, but there's also, there's more than regulatory authorities. We need to have the right technology. We need to understand what are going to be. So there are different. Let me step back. There are different aspects. There is first writing a protocol, automation of tasks. That's one angle that has not that much to do with health authorities. I think there's a lot of work that can be done internally with automation, but it's more a question of do we feel ready or not, and what is the level of confidence that we have. So that one I would put it aside, and it's not regulatory, health regulatory related. Then there is the aspect of design methodology, which I think is something that health authorities are quite open to, but there's still some work to do to make sure that we have the confidence that we are designing the right trials using these technologies, such as adaptive trials, for example. But health authorities are quite open to the concept because they see the potential that we would bring to focus on the right trials for the right patient, for example, with using these technologies. Then there is the execution of trials, and I think that is where there's more complexity, and there's a regulatory aspect, but it goes beyond that. There is data privacy, there is a risk with cybersecurity, there is using the right training models, etc. So that one is more complex than health authorities. And then there is a data analytics, which is also related to data privacy, to using the right models. This one could be internal and external. But we are using a lot of data analytics to understand new hypotheses for new trials. That doesn't have to have a regulatory implication. So I think both are related, but not only.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Camille. And obviously, we know each other at this point, and I would say that you are an innovator. So it's not like you're speaking typically with an abundance of caution. But I think that what you're trying to do here is be pragmatic and ensure that we invest sensibly. Thank you so much for that. So who's next? I think, Matt, you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, if that's all right, Paul.
And go for it, please.
Building a little bit on what Camille's saying. So I do think it's really important that we do go stepwise, but I think the risk of going stepwise is that you work in silos and do individual pilots that don't then connect. And I think that can be actually really dangerous in that we won't get the full value of AI if as an example, if you decide that you're going to pilot with one organization how to design a protocol and another how to write it and another how to write the clinical study report, because the reality is all of these things are interconnected, and understanding the connectivity and making sure that you build systems that can then deal with that interconnectivity, I think is absolutely critical to actually extracting the value. And so where I absolutely agree with Camille is that we need to have clear experiments with clear outcomes and build confidence. A really good way of actually building confidence twofold. One is having humans in the loop, in the right place in the loop. And the second is having explainability around the models that you're using. But I think being disconnected and thinking it's okay to run individual pilots without a view of an overall strategy and without building towards that strategy is actually one of the big risks that we carry at the moment.
So, Matt, thank you for responding to Camille. And if I was to just ask you blank canvas, how you would describe the greatest challenge that we have in, our journey from where we are today to being able to adopt some of these dreamlike potential scenarios, where would you describe as the greatest challenge of today?
I'm going to break the rules slightly and pick two. I think one is the data landscape and having organizations being able to organize their data, their own data, and then access publicly available data in a way that allows them to generate the right insights so that it's insights, not noise. And then the second area is the change management. It's having a clear organizational vision and a way of organizing within the enterprise to make sure that everything you're doing is aligning to that vision. I think those two challenges, and actually they're interrelated in that often complex data landscapes is a symptom of organizations where there isn't that clarity of vision as well, Paul.
Yeah. Well, they have, of course, been persistent problems in almost any part, but at the same time,
nothing new in the world.
But at the same time, I consider them eminently achievable as well,
yes,
with
absolutely.
strong and honest leadership. I think that they most definitely can. So, Raj, Mickey, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm going to build a little bit on what Matt's shared around the connectivity and having the big picture, because obviously foundational readiness is going to be key. And even if we have a solid backbone, AI adoption can fail because sometimes teams aren't trained. So, if we think about workflows and the processes that we have, that foundation needs to be really strong. Otherwise, implementing AI is just going to help amplify the noise. And similar to what Camille mentioned around the regulators, whatever AI use we have, the outputs, then they need to be explained. There needs to be confidence with investigators, patients, regulators need to have that confidence. And when I say foundation, it's the processes, the people, we talk about change management, but also structured metadata and traceability, because I think if you can't explain that, and I think even when you shared the data from the poll question, fragmented systems came up. And is that fragmented systems internally? Is that fragmented systems with contract research organizations, sponsor sites? How do you pull it all together? And Camille touched on data privacy, and that's really, if you've got fragmented systems, it's going to lead to sort of inconsistent application, which will put you in, non-compliance with GDPR, HIPAA rules and things like that. So I think I always think of AI as like the shiny object, but without structure, sort of building a skyscraper like on sand type of a analogy. So I think it is really key, to look at all of those aspects, the people, do you have that baseline within your organization of what people understand AI to be? There's so much out there, and it's like you need to look at your own maturity and where you are from processes and scalability before you just think, oh, there's this option out there, let's bring that in, let's bolt that onto our processes, because it really needs to be integrated and just not implemented.
Now, Raj, I'm really keen to know if you're willing to share where you think the greatest foundation building at Jazz, or where the greatest deficit currently is. And I know that what you want to say is, of course, repeat what you just said. It's integrated, it's not one or the other. But if there was one where you think that your company and maybe our industry in general is perhaps under indexing on at the moment, what would you say it is?
Um,
Or
I
is
think it's
everyone at Jazz wonderful?
I mean, obviously, there's. I like Camille's point around that integration. What Matt's mentioned around not having the silo. So at Jazz, we have a centre of excellence that's been established, where everything is sort of being overseen under one umbrella for the R&D organisation, and work streams being developed and things. So I think that transparency is really key.
Okay. So transparency, and I'm also keen to hear other people's opinions on centralization when they speak. That would be an interesting thing, I think, to talk about. But Mickey, back to you. Any response to what you've heard? And of course, what would you describe from where you sit as the greatest challenge?
Yeah, so I think some common things, and thank you, Paul, for having me here. So I think I put challenges in three buckets. So one is, what is the application of the AI solution? And I think about this in two separate sub buckets. One is this patient facing or is this back office, right? And I think that there's challenges in each of those that are different. The second big bucket that I think about in terms of challenges is evaluation. How are we evaluating these solutions and tools to make sure, A, that they work, and B, that we can provide confidence to the users that the data are accurate and precise, and there's data provenance, etc. And then the third bucket is adoption, which I think both Camille and Raj alluded to, and we sit in our offices and our developers are working on all these great solutions. And then when you think about what study teams are doing on their day-to-day, if you say, oh, we have a new innovative AI tool, they're like, I need to deliver my study, right? That's what I'm doing day in and day out. And so how do we think about that adoption piece early on? Because otherwise we're going to have great tools that we've evaluated and they work and we can see that there's trust and data provenance. They might even go through the regulatory process, but then, everybody goes to their Excel spreadsheet. So I think thinking about that in the beginning is going to be very important. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about challenges in those three buckets.
Thank you, Mickey.
Can I add one more challenge that I think we touched on a little bit, but I think it's actually quite important, and that's probably something that we need to come almost collectively on. It's about the data sources. In the end, it's how we're going to train models. We need to have data sources that are going to be structured in a way that we can use them, train the algorithm, and then apply it to clinical trials, to then patient population after approval of treatments. So I think it's important that we start to structure our data in the real world in a consistent way. We're going to have to use more and more multimodal data. So we also need to find a way to get all this data together, and again in a consistent way. And across countries, it's done differently. Across institutions, it's done differently. Everybody is very much into, we need to build AI in our systems, but everybody starts to build their own AI approach. So I think we need to find a way to harmonize this a little bit better if we want to get faster to something that is applicable.
So thank you, Camille. And I would really like to hear what Matt has to say on that, because Matt, you are obviously spanning uniquely with Evanova. You're a mixture of a technology provider with, of course, a pharma company structure and ownership. So how have you determined the solution to this data source and quality issue? Because it's we've been talking about it for over a decade, let's be honest. Whose responsibility is it? How does it get divided up? Because you can kind of sit with one leg on either side of the table. I'm really interested to know what you've decided is optimum, because you've got that ability to choose.
Yeah, so Paul, it's a great question, and I just want to start off by stressing, Evanova's from a pharma background. We are now, an independent technology company. We are working with with multiple sponsors. And actually that gives me a fascinating insight to seeing actually how different people are approaching the same challenges. I think actually each of the other panelists have said similar things in slightly different ways, that there's a difference between operational information and patient information. And I think if we start with the operational information, there's actually still two sources there. There's one source of information which is publicly available. It's things like the information that you can get from Transcelerate and from other organizations. And then there's the data that you hold as a company. And the challenge that leaves us with as a technology provider and partner then is actually, from our perspective, developing models which can be used by the industry, but also providing the opportunity for people to bring their own data or bring their own model, and combine that with the publicly available information. And I think that's the interesting piece, Paul, is that companies will all have their own context, and so having a data model to rule all data models probably isn't the right way to go. I think it's having that combination of publicly available information with enterprise-specific information that deals with the reality in that enterprise. And I think I would urge people to consider, when you're looking at partners here, having partners who can help you develop models, but can also ingest models from other sources. And I think that's a really important element to this. I think Camille was then absolutely right in terms of starting to think about how we organize data. And I think particularly from a real world data perspective, and making sure that we're able to clean that data adequately to allow it to then be utilized. I think a lot of that is about being strategic. So it's starting with the problems you want to solve or the opportunities that you see, and then ensuring that you're getting your data ready to do those things, rather than again thinking that you can magically utilize any piece of data and AI will solve it for you. AI won't. You'll have to structure the information and understand how to structure it, and I think be focused on what problems that you're trying to solve.
So very keen also to hear Mickey's perspective on this, another person who straddles and wears more than one hat. Also a super interesting discussion in the chat about the need for clean data or not. So take a look at that if you can. But yes, Mickey. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to launch another poll question while you talk about barriers. But Mickey, over to you.
Yeah, I really like a lot what Matt said about being strategic, and maybe what I'll say is data preparation being right-sized. So we often are in our own organizations and we have like a micro world, right? And we think that everybody functions the way we function and everybody has data organized and access to it in the way that we have it. And certainly that's not consistent across different organizations, different sizes. There's large pharma, there's small pharma, there's biotech, there's technology companies, etc. So I think one thing that we need to be mindful for each organization, and something that we're thinking about a lot, is how do we, where's like the biggest bang for our buck in terms of our data, and where do we start, right? So what's the ROI? What is the purpose? What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Because sometimes trying to organize all the data that we've accumulated over 30 years can feel like we're trying to boil the ocean. And so how can we pick certain areas to start and then move from there? So I think the strategy needs to be right-sized to the organization, and also think about, your own organization has data that's biased. So our data is the data of the trials that we've conducted. And, they've been biased in a certain therapeutic area, they've been biased in a certain population. And so to Camille's point about, how do we, get access to data across different organizations to make the models stronger, I think that's going to be important. So I think we're wrestling with that question, how can we do this on our own versus how can we, merge data with others to try to increase the power of what these models can do.
Well, time flies when you're having fun. Believe it or not, we are already halfway through our webinar, and I want to shift the conversation from challenges to solutions and opportunities. And Raj, I've got my eye on you. We're going to have you kick off. I can see you're an incredible multitasker there with the chat window as well. You are a solution-oriented person, a positive-minded person, and you're obviously working across the width of your organization. How do we get to? I've invented a phrase. I've called it minimum viable maturity. So how do we get ourselves up to a standard that allows us to then be able to move forward? Because we don't all need to be experts, do we? We don't all need to be able to write algorithms in our sleep, but we do, of course, need that ability to understand enough. So what are the organizational readiness aspects that we need to get to this minimum standard?
Thanks, Paul. And the way I think of that is more around clear ownership, validation, and we've touched on data, the cleanliness of data, but also data stewardship roles. Having that clear accountability for the data quality. In the chat, we talked a little bit about the FAIR principles, having a governance framework around how your sort of data models are validated, monitored. I quite like the idea of cross-functional AI sort of playbooks. I think, Matt mentioned about the silos. So I think that's an area I would say around playbooks. And I put in the chat as well that the protocol isn't no longer a document. You might as well think of it as your operating system for your trial. And you can't be thinking of, to Mickey's point around implementing the technology piece later. It's actually from the beginning as you're designing your study, your protocols, sort of working hand in hand with those. And I think, from my previous experience around managing processes and inspections, audits and things, protocol versions is always a challenge as well. So I think that ownership piece, validation are going to be key from an operational readiness perspective.
Okay. So thank you, Raj, for kicking us off. For the other panelists, I would like to offer you a promotion. You are all now Chief R&D Officer of a major pharmaceutical company. So you have that mandate and you have certainly resources at your disposal. What, now that you have complete freedom, you've still got shareholders, but, relative freedom, to invest where you see best fit, what are you going to invest in to ensure that you hit this minimum standard and to make sure that your company is far better than any other? And I particularly want you to understand that you have got some trade-offs to make here. You can't just invest everything in everything. I'm really interested in what's priority for you. I realize now nobody wants to answer. I'll give you a second, but
so maybe Paul, I can kick us off.
No, go on, Mickey.
Sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, you go first.
Everyone's so polite. I'll pick somebody. Okay, Mickey, go for it.
And so, Paul, maybe I'm going to maybe put aside like the back office stuff, right? So like the workflows, automation, document generation. Like to me, we're there. We need to validate and evaluate. But I think what I'm thinking about priorities is, how can we create technologies that are patient-facing that are really going to have an impact on clinical trials? And the first thing that comes to mind is access to trials and recruitment, right? And so we think about that today, biggest bottleneck. And, again, one thing is to develop an AI tool to write a protocol. Another very different one is to develop an AI tool to communicate with a participant. And not only is that critical in terms of a regulatory perspective and what's going to have to be done there, but also you're taking, I think, all the biases of how these models were built and then transferring it to that participant interaction, right? So those biases are there. And so how do we think about those as we start deploying these tools with participants? A, are they interested in working with them? B, or do they actually make a difference? Do they increase access to clinical trials? Can we use them to expedite recruitment that then would inform how we design a future trial? So I would invest in hard regulatory-driven problems that AI can solve in interaction with participants. And we're in a very particular position because we're in an academic institution, so we have ways of doing that. So I recognize that it's very particular for us. and the ROI sometimes is not there the way that you would think in traditional R&D models. But certainly the patient interaction with AI tools is something that is top of mind.
Yeah. Well, this is really interesting. Matt, before we go to you, just sharing the poll results on the barriers question, which you can hopefully see in front of you now. Much more even spread this time. Which technology initiatives stall in your, sorry, when technology initiatives stall in your organization, what's usually the reason? Unclear ownership, which is exactly what Raj spoke about a second ago, getting just over a fifth. Compliance, risk-averse culture, fear, getting a second place, and focus on the technology over the human problem being in third place. So all things that we've all heard before. Second part, which barrier do you believe is the hardest for you personally to overcome? And it's the cultural barrier that is, nearly double any of the other votes there, the entrenched mindsets and the culture. Again, they're quite an even spread compared to before. So interesting stuff. Matt, you are, as I said, Chief R&D Officer, and the floor is back to you.
Yeah, and I'm really pleased that Mickey went before me, because I've now got that great opportunity to actually join the dots between what Raj and Mickey said, and actually want to be able to do both of those things. So one of the things that we know is that when people are designing protocols, and Raj, I completely agree with what you said around the protocol no longer being a document, but essentially being that map through the clinical program. But actually, when you're designing a protocol, and it's not really about writing the protocol as such, it's about the design of the protocol. Mm-hmm. And organizations are either optimizing for speed or for cost or for probability of technical success. And one of the things actually organizations aren't great at optimizing for is ability to recruit, and actually really understanding the ability to recruit. And the issue that we have at the moment is that actually with data set up in the way it is and the way teams have to work, you're almost trying to optimize for each of those individually and decide what choices you're making. AI actually allows you to optimize for all of those things together. What that can allow us to do is to have a clinical program that we've actually optimized for recruitment based on things like inclusion exclusion criteria, but also the schedule of assessments, making sure that actually we're removing assessments that are adding minimal value and driving high burden for patients. We're then able to actually use AI to select the right countries and the right sites within those countries where there's capacity, where there's capability, and where we know from patient record information there's actually enough patients in those areas who meet those eligibility criteria to be part of the trial. And then exactly as you're saying, Mickey, being able to use a mix of AI and behavioral science techniques to be able to communicate to patients as individuals around the benefits and the trade-offs of the trial, and really being able to accelerate the program. And I think if we bring those things together, not even getting to the point of being able to use things like digital twins and remote data collection and many other things that I'm passionate about, actually by getting the front end right, driving elegant design that meets patient needs and being able to communicate with patients, we can probably take a year out of many clinical development programs by getting those things right. And it's not that organizations don't want to do that today. It's that actually it's really, really difficult because you have disparate data sources and real challenges in bringing all of those insights together. And I actually think that's what AI is. That's where I would focus a lot of the effort. And then finally, and I'll stop talking then, Paul, to Raj's other point, there's probably about 200 downstream documents and processes from the work that we've done with sponsors that are fed off of the protocol. Now imagine connecting those all to the protocol so that when you do finalize that protocol or need to update it for some reason, everything else is updated automatically, and think about the resources that are actually taken out of the loop and can focus on the real job of clinical development by automating those processes. And that's why I started by having a plea to not work in silos, because that's actually the magic of what we can achieve, and certainly is achievable in small steps now today.
Thank you, Matt, and please don't worry, I enjoy hearing you talk, so please do continue. I actually really like that you mentioned something we don't hear very often, despite working in a very human industry and obviously focusing on technology a lot, which was behavioral science, which takes a back seat and is somehow completely deprioritized against clinical science, not just here in R&D, but across the organization as well. So very pleased to hear you talk about the importance and perhaps a little bit of a blind spot that we have around there. Camille, would love to hear from you on this.
So actually, it's interesting because I'm going to repeat somehow what my colleagues have said here. If I was to prioritize on something, it would be really two things, very similar to what Matt said a minute ago. First is inclusion of patient and identification of patient that would go in trials, and the second one would be about trial design. And the reason for that, so I'm an expert in oncology, so I'm going to give a little bit of an example in oncology. One of the biggest challenges we face today in clinical trials in oncology is delay in enrollment, delay in studies in general, but delay in enrollment is what is driving this delay. 80% of studies in oncology will face some sort of delay, and actually 20% of studies in oncology will have to be terminated before the end of the enrollment that was expected. So there's a huge impact in many ways on budgets associated with studies, on outcomes potentially from the studies, and we enroll patients in these studies, so we need to make sure we can enroll as many patients as needed to meet the endpoint. Most of the challenge that we're facing is because we have more and more complex patient population that we want to enroll in these studies. So we have a lot of screening failure. We have to screen many patients to identify the right patient. So being able to identify patients as simply as possible is critical. And there are multiple companies actually trying to look at how can we identify patients in a better way. What is interesting is we've tried different companies, and we've seen actually that you can have a great success or a great failure. Giving you the example, some companies would help you to identify patients that would meet certain criteria, but actually when we verify this with the investigators, we realize that 80% of patients would not be eligible in the end for this study. In some other studies, we see that actually 90% of patients would be eligible for the study. So we looked at what can make the difference between these studies. And actually, it's still, if you have a simple study, a simple protocol, the AI is able to identify patients who would go in the study. If you have a complex protocol, we're not there yet. And that's where we fell identifying patients. So the initial problem we're trying to resolve is not resolved yet by AI, but I'm very hopeful that this is going to be one of the way. And the second one is about trial design. If we are able to optimize trial design in a way that we can not only look at eligibility criteria, but also the right patient population. And I'm personally very interested in adaptive design that would use predictive analytics to enroll a large group of patients, but during the study conduct, be able to identify who is more likely to benefit from the treatment, so we can really tailor the study design to what is going to be the right group of patients. I think that will help a lot also the conduct of trials and the impact we can make. And that is something, again, going back to regulatory authorities, health authorities want us to do studies that are going to maximize the benefit for patients. So the more we can enroll the right patients, the more we can expose patients to a treatment that is going to be effective, the more they will be receptive to this type of approaches. So this would be my two investments.
Thank you, Camille. I think we have some strong contenders for Chief R&D Officer in the room, so that's hugely appreciated. And you will see that I've put up a poll question. Only 40% of you have answered, though, so please do the rest of you. I hope you're not asleep. If you can get that number a little higher, then I will end it and we will see the results. We've only got 15 minutes left. Time is continuing to fly onwards, and I want to use these last few minutes just to talk about how we actually make it stick. We've talked about the challenges, we've talked a little bit about the opportunity and maybe even the solutions ahead of us, but of course the solution solution is nothing unless it actually sticks and it's made to be sustainable. And one of the things that we can almost predict with AI, that whilst we're on an upward climb and an upward investment, that there will be a wobbly moment at some point when we are questioning the ROI, questioning the long-term benefits of adopting this technology. So I want to hear your thoughts on not just getting that backbone correct, as we said before, but also how to ensure that we have longevity here, that imagine you run 10 pilots and they all go badly, yet somehow you believe in this technology is still there. How do you maintain the faith and push through in those situations? So I want to hear from both a technical and an operational perspective from each of you. So what have you got to offer me? I'll hold this poll open for just one more minute for those who haven't answered it yet. Raj, it looked like, I couldn't tell if you were about to talk or if you were about to start typing, but it looked like
I was looking at the poll responses, but for me, I think it's more around not picking AI use cases based on business value. I think you have to look at
them based on business value. Okay.
Yes.
I'm interested in
And the
this
reason
answer.
why I say that is because I think you need to look at the maturity of your organization. You need to sort of look at criticality versus complexity, because everyone's style, processes and systems, complexity of your studies is all different. And we talked a little bit about, for me, it's breaking that protocol sort of chaos, and how do you bring in AI as part of authoring that feeds into then your monitoring visit reports, bringing in the reg intel to make sure you've captured the regulatory requirements. So I think everyone, one solution isn't going to fit all. So if you hear someone racing ahead in a particular area, just don't be a follower. I think you have to pick based on your maturity and the complexity of what your studies.
Okay, well, I definitely agree in the don't be a follower, and we are a little sheep-like in our industry.
Yeah.
I think I don't think I'm offending anybody or surprising anybody by saying that. So yeah, know what you're actually aiming for. I appreciate that. Thank you. Anyone else want to come on this question? How do we sustain this, make it stick, make it last the temporary highs or lows of the next pilot? Mickey.
I mean, one thing that comes to mind, Paul, is engagement, and engagement early with the people that have an invested interest in this, and in our industry that has multiple groups, right? So it goes from the patients, CROs, sponsors, sites. Very important, that a piece that we probably have not talked a lot about. It's sites and site burden and tech burden at the sites, and so I think keeping people engaged and showing the value, and starting with like service. This is going to help you in this way, but yeah, for real, it's not just another login. Keeping people engaged during the whole process and engaging them early, I think it's going to be critical. And then also, we are going to fail, and we need to feel comfortable with failures. Of course, ensuring that there's participant safety, but just like any technology, especially at this stage, we just have to be in that phase and then just iterate, and knowing that what we are talking about today in 6 months is going to be different. And so engaging people and being comfortable with failure, I think it's a good place to start. And I think the engagement part is important, as we've started to do that, is challenge our assumptions, is challenge the problems that we think we needed to solve, or the problem, we sometimes focus more on the solutions, like we have this widget and it's going to be so great. And then when we talk to the people, they're like, well, that's not actually a problem. And so I think that engagement is just going to be critical for this to stick.
Mickey, you said a couple of things there that remind me. I was actually at a conference yesterday about launch excellence, working with commercial and medical teams on launch excellence. And one of the sentiments that came out early was acknowledgement that everyone is going to be wrong when they first launch their medicine. But the fact that you stick to it without being willing to adapt and change is actually what's causing the problems. And of course, we all know how much is invested in launches. So definitely some similarities there. Just want to quickly show you the poll results if you've not seen them. So progress was the title of this, and when I asked where is AI most being used now, it was, I'm afraid to say, Mickey, on all of those operational efficiency things that you decided not to talk about earlier, document drafting and review, etc., getting nearly a quarter of the vote. And then when I asked when a pilot succeeds technically, What do you believe most often stops it scaling beyond that? And as so many people have said in the last few minutes, integration is the key. Interestingly, 0% of people said compliance. Okay. I've got a couple more polls to try and get through in the last 10 minutes, so please keep those fingers at the ready as they appear on your screen. Who else wants to answer my question in the meantime about making it stick? Matt, I think you did yourself.
Yeah, and we're all agreeing with each other far too much on this panel, and unfortunately, I'm actually not going to break the habit here. So I think there's a couple of things I just want to kind of really stress. The first is we're doing these things with people, not to people. And so I think actually one of the biggest challenges is actually not really looking with the teams who will be using these tools, what impact that will have on their processes, and actually redesigning those processes and designing the tools with the audiences who will use them. I think that's a critical step. I think the other thing to remember is that there's no such thing as the only bad experiment is one where you don't know what the outcome was. And so there will be things that go wrong. There will be outcomes that you didn't expect, but actually being really clear as you're going into a piece of work, what it is you're going to measure and what you're going to do based on the outcomes you measure is the critical step here. And actually, you can use AI to do both of those things as well. So I think actually the use of AI in tool design and implementation and measurement of implementation is something that we shouldn't ignore. But I really just fundamentally agree with what both Raj and Mickey said prior.
Thank you. Just one thing I've noticed, by the way, a lot of people are writing comments, but writing just to hosts and panelists. Great, we get to see everything, but make sure you change that little drop-down box to everyone so that we can all join in the conversation. Thank you, Matt, for that. Camille, I know that you were multitasking there, so do you feel ready for this question?
Totally. So I have to say I agree with Matt. We all agree on. So I'm going to try to come with something slightly different, but it's going to be related. We need to build trusts, and ultimately, if we have technologies and tools that we're using that patients don't trust, they will not be part of trials that are using AI. If we cannot convince the health authorities that the algorithms that we're using are reliable, that the data sources that we're using can be generalizable, if in general there's no trust, that cannot be sustained. So I think it's really important that we build this transparency, that we build a language that people can understand. And again, I'm thinking very much patient here. Patients are overwhelmed when they have a diagnosis with a disease. And if they have to get on a trial, we need to make sure that they feel comfortable with what we are telling them. And it's already difficult with a medical language. If on top of that we add some AI language, it can be a little bit frightening. So I think we need to really learn how to communicate AI in the most efficient and simple way. And at the end of the day, going back a little bit to Raj was saying, it's not about building a business case. It's about building a case that is going to accelerate innovation for patients. Mm-hmm. If we keep the patient at the center of what we do, I think, again, one, we will build trust. Second, we'll put our priorities in the right order. And third, I think then we can bring people along with us and be successful.
Thank you, Camille. I obviously hugely appreciate what you've just said about remembering who we're working for at the end of the day. But we all know how it is. We've got pressures, particularly around time and investment, and particularly at the moment. Have you got any cunning special technique skills for being able to drown out the noise and the relentless machine of the organization, and indeed to do exactly as you say, remember who we're working for? Have you got any smart, I don't really know what the word is, but can you just offer anything that might help those in the room who are trying to keep everybody happy, or maybe they shouldn't be trying to keep everybody happy, and remembering who to keep happy at the end of the day? By the way, I'm closing the poll now, so thank you. I'll share the results as well. Camille.
So that's a tough question.
I didn't say we were going to make them easy, did I?
Yeah, no, that's true. And so I have to say no, I don't have a good answer to this one. I think we should not try to have everybody happy at first. And again, it's a question of going step by step, being cautious, recognizing what we don't know along the way, and being very transparent. But I don't have yet the answer on how can we resolve all of this today. I think it's going to be a step by step approach.
Okay. So we're fast running out of time. A quick readout on the latest poll results. If you could only invest in one change, so I've given everybody a promotion to Chief R&D Officer, then where would you invest? 46% of people saying cross-functional AI design team above everything else, which I thought was very interesting. And which of these would most convince you that your organization had truly become AI ready? A bit more of an even spread, 22% on most new studies assume AI support from the start, and AI impact is tracked on cycle time, quality, and inspection findings, getting 25%. Okay. I want to invite the panel for a final comment, really, a Monday morning ready comment, if you possibly can. What is it that you are personally taking away from a conversation like this and wanting to make a change within your organization? Again, another really easy question for you as we close out today's session.
I don't mind going, Paul. Like for me,
Please.
digital maturity of the team sport. We talked about breaking down the silos, making sure there's the trust, the alignment, and that needs to be there across every layer of the organization. So that would be my just reiterating that it is a team effort.
Thank you. Thank you. You may have noticed I've put a very strange question up called Scope Summit. I shall reveal why in a moment, but please do tell us if you're going to the Scope Summit in Florida at the beginning of next year. Sorry, Mickey, over to you.
No, I was just going to say, I'm feeling so optimistic just because of the potential and the opportunity. We all are in this business, in organizations, and are solving very complex, highly regulated problems, right, that are going to affect people's lives. And so I think we have what it takes. And it's not different than problems that we've solved in the past. But there's so much potential in how we can aggregate data and design protocols that are going to make a difference that we couldn't do before. And so as long as we have the patient in mind and how we can increase access to clinical trials, I think we're going to be on the right track.
Thank you. Matt, Camille, you have just time for a final word at this point.
I'll go very briefly and say, I think we need to focus on the problems, and we need to work with the technology to solve those problems. I'm never a fan of the nice hammer walking around looking for a nail to hit. So let's kind of focus on actually what are the problems that we really believe that we can solve, and then drive the technology towards those solutions.
Camille.
I'm going to add something slightly different and a little bit philosophical. I think we need to think about how we are going to continue to train newer generations, especially newer generation, so they continue thinking and they continue challenging themselves, they continue being creative and not just rely on AI to do literature research, protocol writing, and thinking about questions that we have to resolve in the future for medicines. So in general, I would say we need to think about how we're going to continue to keep our brains working.
Indeed. Well, one excellent note to finish on, Camille. And I have to say, I am quite energized by this discussion as well, but particularly by those of you who chose to come here. It's so easy to get excited about the shiny tools and the objects and the possibilities of the future. And of course, we need that. That's our motivation. But at the same time, we need the hard work of building the foundation. There's no point, as I think it was Raj who said, building a skyscraper if it's just on sand. And if you don't have that foundation there, then firstly, you don't have, of course, the ability to build a skyscraper, but you also don't have the choice of what building to put on top of it. Now, this is such an important topic to me personally, and that actually the reason why we asked about scope and one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar is because at Impatient Health, we have decided to team up a little with Evanova. So we're doing something which is hopefully going to try and raise the bar of maturity and allow us to kind of self-assess a little bit, give ourselves a benchmark, a yardstick, almost like a personality test, if you like, in some ways, and to see just where we sit, because I think so many of us don't even know of what could be, and of course where we sit. So I think that's going to be a really interesting development and see where we go. Would be delighted to talk to anyone in the future that wants to discuss more about how we go down that path. But for now, I obviously want to say a massive, massive thank you to our panel. They've all given their time, energy, and insights to this process and this conversation. I personally think it's been marvelous. I've seen lots of nice comments on the chat window as well. Do please leave a final comment if you've got any suggestions for what we can do in the future to advance this area. It's so vital. So many patients and people depend on it. And yeah, just thank you to all of you really for just being part of this conversation and helping to push our industry forward. It is sorely needed. And thank you for spending this hour with us. I'm going to end there. You're already a minute late for your next meeting, so I won't hold you any further. Thanks again. I'll hold this window open for another couple of minutes if you're still typing though. But thank you for now from the Impatient team, from Evernova, who've been a great partner, and to Raj, Camille, Mickey, and Matt for your incredible efforts and insights today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.